Although that was almost a year ago, the memory, the memory of that Christmas celebration still haunts. In my opinion, the event took place at Charlotte's office is a sleek high-rise. Downtown, it always felt like another world compared to the peaceful life we built together at home. I recall how the place was altered that night. The generally sterilized conference rooms, decorated with garlands and dazzling fairy lights. Lamps and tables are brimming with cuisine. A jazz quartet performed, softening the background their melodies. Weave amid the murmur of chatter. Charlotte was in with clinking glasses. In her element, she looked magnificent. Dark green outfit, casting in her hair. Soft waves swept over her shoulders as marketing director at one of the city's most successful firms she led. Attention not only for her appearance, but for watching her with poise and confidence. That night, I couldn't stop feeling proud. 7 years together, 6 of which, as husband and wife, I still couldn't. I believed she was mine, yet our marriage was not perfect, but I thought it was solid. We had arguments like everyone else. And yes, her career kept her busy, sometimes too hectic, yet we've always made it works. I reminded myself, because love and trust, a little patience could weather anything. I used to believe that. That night, though, something changed. Steve's name stuck with me. I was her supervisor, and Charlot had mentioned him frequently during the last year. If I'm honest, Steve had this fantastic idea, or Steve adored my. Initially, I attributed the presentation to her appreciation for a successful. However, the prevalence of his name, our chats had started to gnaw. I felt a subtle discomfort that I couldn't quite shake. I initially met him at the party. He was everything I expected. Tall, polished, and effortlessly charismatic. He greeted me warmly and shook my hand tightly as Charlotte stood behind him. I laughed, slightly louder than normal. Observed how they interacted. Glance lingered on her just a little bit. Her smile was brighter when she chatted to him, and I convinced myself that I was imagining things paranoid. I thought. However, I couldn't ignore the way my gut constricted as soon as I saw them. The celebration carried on, and I tried to relax with a sip of whiskey as I mingled with her colleagues, but I couldn't help but look towards. Charlotte was always in the midst of everything, laughing and talking, commanding attention. She appeared joyful. I was genuinely thrilled, but I also felt like, as an outsider in her world, the irony grated. Charlotte had begged me to come here, event claiming that it was vital to her career. It's required, she said, weeks. With her disarming smile, Steve wants all senior partners and their spouses. You'll charm everyone like you always do, I promised her back then. The excitement was contagious tonight, though. I felt like I was a prop in a performance where everyone else knew their lines. Except for me. I sipped my watered-down whiskey and scanned the room, laughing and clinking glasses, hardly registering it was far from the Charlotte and I used to have peaceful evenings, spend thinking about the future we had planned to begin trying for a baby next year. She wanted to wait, citing her career's sudden rise is a reason to hold off. I had agreed with her. It appeared like indecision had stung lately. Her job was her true love. Her world revolved around Steve, her boss. Increasingly frequent late nights. The sound of laughter brought me back to. Presently, I was speaking with one of Charlotte's colleagues or juniors, associate, who was all too ready to create small chat. I observe his eyes dart to something or someone is behind me when Charlotte was the center of attention. A group laughing easily at something Steve had said. Her hand rested gently on his arm as he leaned forward. Whisper something. Your wife is quite the star here, the junior associate commented. There was sympathy in his tone, and I did not understand till I caught the Others in the room gave sidelong glances. A few people smiled politely at me, but expressions of others held something. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before I realized I hadn't seen Charlotte for, while my eyes instantly sought her, skin the groupings of partygoers. However, she was not to be located the last. I saw her near the bar. Steve, I walked over to the Locati Zero Inn where Steve's chest tightened. She wasn't there. Was not either. I approached one of her co-workers, someone I faintly recognized. Have you seen anything from a dinner some months ago? Charlotte, her co-worker, hesitated then. She glanced at the staircase and went. I believe Steve went upstairs quite some time ago. He has an office on the next floor. I felt a cold run through my body as I processed the words. I thanked the co-worker and went upstairs together. I forced myself to stay calm as I made my way to the stairs. My mind raced, looking for innocent reasons, but my stomach clenched with discomfort. Whatever I was about to locate on top of them. Stairs, I knew one thing for certain. Life was about to change. The corridor stretched ahead of me like a gauntlet is darkly lighted and hauntingly quiet, compared to the lively din of the party. Below, my steps faltered as I passed the door. After door, each one seems identical. Anxiety clawed at my chest, constricting with every wrong turn. Where is it? Steve's workplace, but were eventually a faint. I heard a muffled thump, followed by what can only be described as laughter combined with something else. My stomach twisted. I followed the noise. Each stride brought me closer to the entrance at. I approached the end of the hallway. The sounds became clearer, a combination of gasps, a whisper scarcely held by the trees. The sounds we heard were distinct. Charlotte's melodious chuckle, tempered with something far more intimate and deeper. Steve must have had a rougher tone. I stopped just short of the door. My pulse was throbbing in my ears and hand. I shivered as I pulled out my phone, activated the camera. If I was mistaken, I apologized later. But if I was correct, I didn't want to think about it. I wanted proof. Evidence is something to grasp onto. In the destruction of whatever was on the opposite side, my heart was beating, so I tried. The doorknob was locked, and my breath came in short. Frustration and dread rises. A sane man may have. I went away, but I was not sane. Any time the door opened inward, I could tell by the Locati Zero Inn of the hinges, without allowing myself the chance to second. Guess I braced myself and moved my weight. I drove my shoulder against the door. The impact shocked me, but the lock was cheap, but no match for the momentum of. In my desperation, the door flew open, slamming against the wall, revealing the scene inside. Charlotte and Steve froze, like a deer caught in the headlights. Very angry vehicle. They were a mess. Tangled limbs and misplaced clothing. A tableau of shame, so ridiculous that it would have been comical if it hadn't been my life. Charlotte's blouse hung halfway off her shoulder, appeared to have been attacked by the puzzled octopus, as Steve's tie was wrapped around his head like a crown, shirt undone in a manner that appeared more rather disorganized than seductive. The desk behind. There was an avalanche of documents, upturned coffee cups, bearing witness due of their lack of professionalism and more. For the moment, none of us moved. Charlotte's eyes widened in pure horror. Her lips opened and closed, like a fish grasping for oxygen. Steve pale. A ghost made a faint attempt to pull himself together, failing badly. His trousers betrayed him, dropping like an. I can explain the poor anchoring of the tent. Charlotte stammered, grabbing at her blouse in a futile effort at civility. Meanwhile, Steve raised his hand, as if I was the waiter and he was going to order a latte. Look, guy, this isn't what I cut him off with an unexpected laugh. Even for me, the sound was hollow and harsh. That rang in the room. Oh, please, I murmured, holding up my phone. The camera remained still. Rolling, please explain there. Expression turned from panic to humiliation. Wrath, warring for power. Before you discover what occurs next, please subscribe to the channel. My eyes flashed between them. My breathing was shallow. The weight of the scene pressed down. I lowered and slid my phone. The camera is still in my pocket. I recorded the proof I had captured. Charlotte and Steve had more than enough. I was caught red-handed, and there was no talking their way out of it. But even the phone disappeared from view. The simmering rage in my chest demanded more. Then quiet. Documentation, My voice came out low, trembling with barely contained anger. So this is what I've been dragged to. For front row seat of my own. Humiliation, Matthew. Please don't. Understand, Charlotte began her tone. Desperate and shaky, oh, I understand. Perfectly, I snapped, my voice rising. I understand that the woman I've spent the last 8 years of my life with, the woman I've loved, trusted, and planned a future with, has been sneaking around with her boss. And for what was this, some kind of sick game did you invite me here? To publicly humiliate me, or was that just a bonus? Charlotte's lips moved, but no words came out. Her face twisted into an expression I'd never seen before, equal parts shame and panic. She finally stammered, It's not what it looks like. I let out a humorless laugh that echoed in the room. Not what it looks like, really, because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife decided to turn her boss's office into a soap opera set. Look, Steve interjected, straightening his disheveled shirt in a transparent attempt to regain some authority. This is clearly a misunderstanding. If you two had a happy marriage, none of this would have happened. My head snapped towards Steve, my glare sharp enough to cut steel. A misunderstanding, that's your excuse. Blame the marriage, blame me. Steve shrugged, his voice laced with infuriating smugness. I'm just saying, maybe this wouldn't have happened if you've been paying more attention to your wife's needs. People don't stray for no reason. His words were gasoline on the fire burning inside me. I crossed the room in 2 swift strides and grabbed Steve by the scruff of his shirt, slamming him against the wall with a force that rattled the frame. Certificates hanging beside us, papers fluttered to the ground as I pressed closer, my knuckles widening as I tightened my grip. You think you're going to lecture me about marriage, you snake? I snarled, my voice vibrating with fury. You don't get to wreck my life and then pretend this is my fault. Calm down. Steve choked out, his hands feebly tugging at my iron grip. If you don't let go, I'll call security, file a report with the police, assault charges. You hear me? I froze for a moment, my nostrils flaring. As I considered the consequences slowly, I released him, but not gently. He stumbled against the wall, straightening his rumpled clothes with shaking hands. This isn't over, I said coldly, my voice as sharp as glass. Steve took a cautious step back, wary of any sudden movement. It should be walk away while you can. I ignored him, turning to Charlotte instead. How long? I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of the question. Charlotte's eyes widened. Matthew, how long has this been going on? I repeated, my tone steadier now, but no less lethal. She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide on a lie that would sound convincing. Her silence stretched, filling the room like a toxic gas. That long? I said finally, my voice low. You can't even say it out loud, can you? Charlotte looked down at her feet, unable to meet my eyes. The confirmation I needed and dreaded was in her silence. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever love and trust we built had been burned to ash, and she wasn't even brave enough to face it. I stepped back, my face hardened into a mask of resolve. You two deserve each other, I spat, my voice laced with disgust. Enjoy your victory, Steve. It's as hollow as the person you've chosen to share it with. I turned toward the door, ready to leave them to wallow in their guilt and shame. But as I reached the doorway, something inside me snapped the words I've been holding back surged to the surface. I turned back, the fury in my chest boiling over. Now I understand. Understand why you didn't want a child. Charlotte, God forbid you upset your boss. Or maybe I gestured around the wrecked office, my tone drenched in sarcasm. Your rapid rise in the company has more to do with private meetings like this than any actual talent. Charlotte broke down, her sobs muffled by her hands as she slumped against the desk. A sound that once would have torn me apart now left me numb. I barely noticed her as Steve stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. Get out of here, he barked. Enough of these family squabbles. And by the way, you shattered the door to my office. Do you have any clue how much that's going to cost? I turned to him gently with ounce of my disdain engraved into my expression. I stepped closer, gazing him down. Shut your mouth, you moron, I hissed, my voice low yet venomous. You're just an SAS who thinks with what's in his pants. A disgrace to your status, but I guess it suited someone like you. He squeezed his jaw, clearly seething, but I didn't wait for a response. He wasn't worth my time. I turned back toward the hallway, my steps steady, my mind made up. As I reached the doorway, I spoke without turning back. I stated that I will never forgive betrayal. Voice calm and final. Expect the divorce papers after the holidays, Matthew. Charlotte's voice cracked when she sobbed. Her words trembled with desperation. Matthew, please give me a second opportunity. We can discuss this later. This isn't. Despite the fact that it was over, I did not stop. Look back. Her voice reverberated behind me, but it sounded little and far away. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. The last thing I heard while walking down, my footsteps echoed in the hallway. Nothingness was Steve's scornful voice. Better divorce than such a worthless husband. My jaw stiffened, but I did not give him the gratification of a reaction. He wasn't worth it. None of them were. The sound of the celebration downstairs grew as I approached the stairway, filled with laughing and music. Air like nothing had occurred except for me. The night and my life as it was over. I needed time to breathe, to find out what the hell I was doing, to do next while remaining. Under the same. Charlotte was horrible every time. Second in that house seemed like a stab in the gut served as a reminder of her betrayal. I packed my belongings that very night, packing clothing and necessities. Packed a duffel bag and called my cousin. Daniel did not hesitate when I asked if I might stay with him for. After a few months, he said no. Questions asked by the time of the holidays were over, and I knew what I had to do. Promised. I discovered a non-nonsense lawyer, type suggested by a buddy, and filed for divorce. Every meeting, every stage of the process felt like removing a splinter from a wound. Painful, but necessary. She tried everything to stop me. Called, texted, and showed up unexpectedly. Daniel once begged me to hear her out. It was a mistake, she stated. Time and over. Her voice was rough. Desperation. We can fix this. We can go back to the way things were. I told her. The truth is that there was no going back. I asked her whether she understood what you'd done. One day, she confronted me on the front porch. You didn't simply cheat on me, Charlotte. You pulled me to the party. They paraded me around like a fool, then went upstairs and slept with your boss. While I was still there, what do you think? Anyone returns from what she tried to apologize, tears spilling down her face. But I was not interested in her statements. Empty, much like her promises for the future. Together, the only thing I desired from her divorce was quick and tidy. I didn't care about taking more than my fair share. I just wanted out. To her credit, Charlotte did not battle me about the terms. Perhaps her guilt weighed too heavily. Or perhaps she simply wanted it to end as much like I did, We divided everything, evenly settled things quickly in court. I moved on with our different lives. I didn't need to use the video, recorded of her and Steve only. The remembrance of it was sufficient to prevent me from ever wishing to see her again. But then, this is the part that almost made me giggle. A couple of weeks after the divorce finalized, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside there was a bill from Steve for the door I had broken into that night. His office, the gall of that guy was, he seemed to be challenging me to retaliate. I paid the bill, but not as I imagined. He deserved it, but I had a better idea. Steve felt he'd won and had no idea. I wasn't sure what was coming. Charlotte and Steve were still together. And honestly, I didn't care, but I did know. Charlotte continued to work for him. That offered me an opportunity to. Steve was shaking things up in his world. Golden Boy is the company's most valuable director, and I realized I was taking him down wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't about. If I had to back down on anything, it would be. I learned that even the most untouchables had weak areas. Began gathering information, piecing. I gathered every ounce of insight I could, learn more about Steve and his company. It turned out that the business was privately owned with shares, shared between 6 significant shareholders. Steve did not own the company where he worked. For these individuals, they were the genuine power behind the scenes. I dug deeper, using social media and corporate filings. To track down 2 of them, I created careful letter 1 part allegation and a 1 part petition outlining how they were hired. The director Steve violated not just corporate standards, but also basic morals. I made it clear about the ethical values, that this wasn't just about me. Steve's behavior did not reflect well on Ed. I was not expecting the complete organization. Many individuals in authority rarely want to rock the boat, and I was ready to escalate. Plan B involves disclosing everything to the turning the company's dirty laundry became a national scandal, but to my surprise, I received a response from one of the stockholders, Lawrence Whitaker, an elderly gentleman having a reputation as a savvy businessman and a staunch conservative. Mr. Whitaker invited me to. I didn't meet him at his office. Hesitate. The day of the meeting, I came early, sitting in the waiting room with my nerves were taut as a bowstring while I was. After being brought in, I found myself to face with a man who radiated silence. Authority. He was in his late 70s, perfectly dressed with a penetrating gaze that made me believe he could see straight through me. Mr. Whitaker, I began. Thank you for seeing me. He nodded, waving for me to have a seat. The letter drew my attention, Mr. Landon. Do not make it a habit to intervene. Day-to-day business matters, but claims are serious if true. They concern. I deeply want to hear the full. I told him everything from the party that Charlotte dragged me to, catching her and Steve in his office. How Steve tried to gaslight me and shift the blame. I maintained a steady tone, but as I couldn't help but recall the events. My voice had an edge of anger in it. After I finished, I opened my phone and played the video I recorded that night. Mr. Whitaker observed in silence. The expression becomes darker with each. He passed second when the video ended. He leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. For a long moment he said nothing, and the quiet stretched until it felt unbearable. Mr. Landon, he said finally, his voice calm but firm, what you've shown me is disgraceful. Not only is Mr. Pierce's behavior morally reprehensible, but it also brings shame to the organization. He represents. This company is built on trust and respect, values that Mr. Pierce has flagrantly disregarded. I nodded, swallowing hard. I'm not asking for anything for myself, Mr. Whitaker. I just want justice. People like Steve shouldn't get away with treating others like stepping stones. He studied me for a moment longer, then gave a yes. Ingle decisive nod, you'll have it I. Can't promise this will be quick or easy. But I assure you Mr. Pierce's actions will not go unanswered. Not much time passed before the company began conducting internal investigations. Lawrence Whitaker was a man of his word. Through whispers and hints from people, I learned that Steve had been subjected to a brutal dressing down by the board. His charm and bravado couldn't save him. This time they fined him a significant amount for violations of corporate malfeasance, then dismissed him in a manner that left his reputation in tatters. Words spread swiftly in their industry, and Steve's name became synonymous with scandal. Charlotte didn't escape unharmed either. She resigned shortly after Steve's dismissal. Maybe it was to save face, or maybe she couldn't bear to stay in the aftermath of the mess she'd helped build. Anyway, she was gone. A few weeks later, I received a call from Mr. Whitaker's office inviting me to another meeting. When I arrived, he greeted me pleasantly, his demeanor more relaxed than before. Mr. Landon, he said, justice has been signaling for me to sit. Serve, I believed you deserved it. I nodded, unsure of how to say. His tone conveyed a sense of finality. Steve, the chapter was closed. Pierce had been dealt with, he continued. His wrongdoing has cost him dearly, not only monetarily, but also professionally. As for Charlotte, he paused briefly. His expression softened, and she too has suffered the consequences of her conduct. I wasn't sure what to say, but he handed me an envelope. This is for you. Simply put, consider it reimbursement for the suffering you endured, but don't. I'm worried it didn't come out of. We made sure, Mr. Pierce. After paying for it, I opened the envelope to find a significant quantity of money inside. It was insufficient to remove the pain, but it was enough to get me started over with a stronger. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker, I said. He gently nodded. You've been through a. Thank you, Mr. Landon. I hope this helps. You move forward, and for what it's worth, you have my compassion. Betrayal is a hurt that takes time to mend. I left the office felt lighter, as if the severity of Steve and Charlotte's betrayal had finally been lifted from my shoulders. That money couldn't repair everything, but it was a start. 6 months later, fate had a weird. I was walking through a park at the time when I spotted Charlotte. She was alone, sitting on a bench, her face turned towards the sky. If looking for something unseen, she noticed me before I could turn away. For a minute, our eyes met, and I hesitated, but she stood and approached me. Matthew, she replied softly, pausing a few times. Several steps away, she stretched out and gently grasped my hand. Her touch was tentative and forgiving. I did stupid things, and I thought I controlled the entire universe. I was invincible, but you showed me that. Truth taught me who I really am. Words hovered in the air, heavy with regret. With a sorrowful smile, she said farewell and walked away. I didn't try to stop her. She did not look back as I watched. I realized something during the divorce. It had not only changed me, it had changed her too. She seems to have understood the seriousness of her deeds, even if it's too late to erase the damage for Steve. I heard through the grapevine that his career had taken a nosedive after dramatic leave, unable to find a place that mirrored his previous status. He concluded, I ended up working as an ordinary manager at a faltering corporation, just trying to stay afloat. It appeared that Mr. Whitaker had done. He did everything he could to guarantee Steve's name remained radioactive. Industry, for a selfish woman like Steve, was a fitting downfall. He'd played his games and lost, and now he lived with the repercussions. I couldn't think a more appropriate ending to his story, or a better reminder that justice comes in the end, has its own method of balancing the scales. If you love this post, please subscribe to the channel, and I wish you excellent mood, and excellent luck.